Can you believe it? It's JWC Livestream. Joe's Writers Club Livestream. This is Sublimated Posey with Ricky and David. And we are coming at you with all of the transcendent force of poetry in hand. Here to teach you, here to learn from you simultaneously. Our goal here through Sublimated Posey is to teach you what we mean by poetic wordplay versus poetic voice fulfillment. Poetic wordplay is being able to compose poesy. Well, you know what? I'll ask David, my faithful co-host. David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Now, when you mention something like poetic wordplay or wordplay in general, what are you referring to?
Poetic or wordplay simply refers to the author's delight in playing with language, like a child would play with Lego blocks, for example.
So the joy of poesy.
The sheer joy of language for language's sake. It's
Right
not
on.
it's not the single solitary justification for metaphor or poetic language, but it's a strong current that's part of what poetry or poetic expression is.
Dig it. Right on, man. And the second half of that coin is the poetic voice fulfillment, which is finding your own individual voice in your prose writing, especially flowery or poetic voices that are uniquely your own. So we got a dual purpose here, but it all amounts to the same thing. There's benefit from both sides, okay? Creatively speaking, I'm doing great. I'm walking on sunshine. Halfway through Chiron 6, more than halfway through now. And I'm throwing down words all the time. Thank goodness for that. And I'm writing with David Anderson here, Anthonyum. It's a mythical pirate fantasy story, I guess is what I would call it. And we're having a blast with that too. I just threw a chapter down. He threw a chapter down yesterday. And I'm working on this other thing for JWC, this Choose Your Own Adventure book. And I wrote, I think, like 1,200 words over the last couple weeks on that. So it's been great, man. It's been great. David, how are you? And how's your creative angle going, man?
I'm fine. Slipping into late fall weather, getting ready for the election cycle, which I always dread, and working on the Athenaeum book with you, of course. And I just completed a cycle of poems that I've been working on for 12 years.
Whoa.
Yes. Yeah. They're poems all based on self-portraits by Rembrandt.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this project before, but it sounds lovely.
It's in early stages, even though I have the completed drafts of all the poems, one poem for each self-portrait in oil. I want to work through them, and there's going to be an extensive revising process. And then I'll think about putting it into a book format with the paintings as illustration. So it's sort of been like a pet project of mine, because Rembrandt has always had a huge impact on my aesthetic sensibility and artistic sensibility. Just as when I was a child, musically, composers like Beethoven and Chopin and Brahms had a huge impact on me. In art, Rembrandt has had a huge impact on me. And I think poets are not poets without the other arts, the existence of the other arts. So we draw from our creative brothers and sisters in a way that should be acknowledged more. So, and that's one of the reasons I'm interested in JWC, is because we want to tear down those barriers between the arts and expression in language and in other forms. So I think the barriers should be torn down.
Yeah, right on, man. JWC is about a lot of stuff, and I would say that you're right about that part of it. And as far as writing poems about paintings, in my more youthful days, in my poetic zeal of youth, whenever I went to a museum or a gallery or something, I always had a notebook with me, and I would throw down a sketch of a painting. I think one of them showed up in my poetry collection, which is still, of course, being edited. But it's cool. There's something magical about sketching and translating from painting to poem. There's something about that, because then the person who reads the poem can go see the painting. The person who sees the painting can go seek out the poem. You know, it's kind of like a nice interactive thing, or at least I thought so. You have a whole. I mean, how many portraits are there? How many poems?
This is a collection of, I would say, 48 poems. So it's enough for a small book.
That's excellent, man. Yeah, I'd love to take a look at that in PDF.
I will share it with you one day. It's just in a very delicate state at this point.
It's understandable. You take your time. You just let me know when it surfaces, because I'll be interested to check it out. Well, yeah, that's good stuff, man. So we're both in a decent place creatively, despite the chaos of the world, despite this upcoming election that you mentioned, which I'm like, la, 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 don't want to think about it. So in this particular case, it's best that we segue over to our next segment. Every week, folks, or at least this is the format so far, we try to read you a poem, and then we talk about it, and then we read a passage of prose and we talk about it. And usually there's some sort of wisdom that rises up at the end, or at least that's been the case for the last 3-4 of these. So today we're consulting one of the poems of Federico Garcia Lorca, who was mentioned by Allen Ginsberg. And that's why I heard of him originally. I don't know if that's ignorant or what that is, but there's so many poems, so many poets, so little time. But I did have a book of Lorca's poems, and I remember toting that around with me for quite a while and enjoying them, reading them when I used to read poetry faithfully, which was long ago. But this is Lorca, Federico Garcia Lorca, and this poem is called Sleepless City. So when you're ready, my good friend. All right.
Just 1 second. I apologize.
No, it's all right. Technical difficulties are manifold, as always, but it's okay. These things should work more smoothly than they do. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, folks. It doesn't always cooperate right away. It's one of the things about Zoom. Sometimes you even have to restart your whole device. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Anywho, this is Sleepless City. Out in the sky, no one sleeps. No one sleeps. The creatures of the moon sniff and prowl about their cabins. Living iguanas will come and bite the men who do not dream. And the broken-hearted fugitives will meet on street corners. An unbelievable alligator resting beneath the tender protest of the stars. Out in the sky, no one sleeps. No one, no one, no one sleeps. In a graveyard far off, there is a corpse who has moaned for 3 years because of an arid landscape in his knee. And that boy they buried this morning cried so much it was necessary to call out the dogs to keep him quiet. Life is not a dream. Careful, careful, careful. We fall down the stairs in order to eat the moist earth, or we climb to the snow's edge with the voices of dead Dahlias. Dahlias. Ooh, that was clumsy. But there is no oblivion. There is no oblivion, no dream. Only flesh exists. Kisses tie our mouths in a tangle of new veins. And those who hurt will hurt without rest. Those who are afraid of death will carry it on their shoulders. One day horses will live in the saloons, and the enraged ants will throw themselves on the yellow skies that take refuge in the eyes of cows. Another day, we will watch the dried butterflies rise from the dead. And still walking through a landscape of gray sponges and silent ships, we will watch our ring flash wild roses spill from our tongues. Careful, be careful, be careful. Those still marked by thaws and thunderstorms, that boy who cries because he has never heard of the invention of bridges, or that corpse who possesses now only his head and a shoe. We must carry them to the wall where the iguanas and the snakes are waiting, where the bear's teeth are waiting, where the mummified hand of the boy is waiting, and the fur and the camel stands on end with a violet blue chill. Out in the sky, no one sleeps, no one, no one, no one sleeps. But if someone does close his eyes, whip him, my children, whip him. Let there be a landscape of open eyes and bitter wounds on fire. Out in the sky, no one sleeps, no one, no one. I have said it before, no one is sleeping. But if someone grows too much moss on his temples during the night, open the stage, trap doors, so he can see in the moonlight fake goblets, the poison, and the skull of the theaters. I guess that's from, says Poet in New York, 1929, 1930. Translated by Greg Simon and Stephen F. White. So that was beautiful. Wonderfully poetic. It's no wonder that Ginsberg referenced him with such aching fondness. It's a bunch of beautiful stuff there. I like the corpse that's moaned for 3 years. I wonder what that is. There's so many little mysteries here, so many little things that he's mystifying, little bits and pieces. It's just an ideal poetic display. Who knows what it is that he's conveying here exactly? It was just beautiful and enjoyable, typical of his work. What did you think of that reading, David? And what do you think of the poem?
Well, I thought the reading was just fine. To me, the poem is about existence without death. So, or if you prefer, life without death. And the increased longevity of such an existence or life brings on more pain and suffering. That could be a very straightforward, simple interpretation of it. Now, there could be obviously political interpretations that we could delve into, involving that are more biographical. But the version I have that I took, another translation I found at the beginning of the poem, Brooklyn Bridge, a Nocturne. And I found that kind of curious because I don't find it in other translations. The poem's translated from Spanish, of course. And the question is, what does the Brooklyn Bridge have to do with it? Because if you look at it, we have iguanas and alligators and all sorts of creatures that one wouldn't typically find in the boroughs of New York. So one wants to ask, obviously, what is going on? And I think we have to keep in mind that this is highly metaphoric language, and that he's using the symbol of New York as this sleepless metaphor. So to me, that's what's happening, is that he's using this concept of the Brooklyn Bridge, or New York itself, as a city that doesn't ever sleep. So there's no rest, and there's no release from the chaos or pain or suffering that life brings.
Is it just me, or does it have, I mean, a lot of poetry does, so it's almost like a non-question, but doesn't it have like a dream-like quality to it?
It has, yes, intensely it does. I would agree with that.
Yeah, just the way there's like creepy animals in places and strange flows of time. Like he mentions horses will live in the saloons, and it's like, well, in order for that to happen, it would have to be a ghost town, and they would have to be able to get in there and stuff. And so it's like, it leads me to believe that he's looking through some sort of timeless lens. Often you'd find that in a dreamscape, so I don't know if, like I said,
it's very symbolic, surrealistic too. We have lines like kisses tie our mouths in a tangle of new veins. That's a very confusing line if you were to take it literally, but it could be a very complex metaphor. And without going into a background about why this poem was written, if it was personal, I think when you have lines like that, it's probably true that to a certain extent, the poem is a personal statement by the poet. So it's not just a general statement of the human condition. It's
experiential.
Yeah, it's experiential, but it's also a confessional to a certain extent. So he's blending a lot of really fantastic, lush imagery that it suggests. He's correlating personal humanity to general humanity in a certain way by making this concept of kisses tying two mouths together. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is a man and a woman, and there's been some sort of romance, and maybe there's now been a death or something. We can speculate if we choose to. That's the fun thing about poetry, is you can take it to any level you want. You can interpret it and work with it in the way that you want.
No, the tangling of veins, it could easily be the kiss, the contact of the kiss itself with a rapid heartbeat because of the enthusiasm of the romance and whatnot.
Yes, I would agree.
There's lots of ways we can interpret that and unpack an analysis of it. But it's real tasty. Check out Lorca, folks. How about you, David? Have you anything else to say about this wonderful poem or about the poet himself?
Well, he's one of my favorite poets. So unless you want to offer me another 3 hours to talk about him, I think I will cut it off from here for the sake of Mr. Lowry, who is our next.
Yeah, very well, very well. Nothing wrong with that. We'll have to double back to more Lorca anyway, and then perhaps then we can get a deeper plunge. Alas, folks, we always have a time budget. But
I would like to add something, if I may, to this. I want this understood. The prose example is from a chapter of a much larger novel, and it's very highly surrealistic, and the character is intoxicated in this passage. So he's not seeing the world clearly. He's more seeing the world through the lenses of an alcoholic or someone who is hallucinating, even possibly.
All right. So this is From Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. This is chapter 5. Behind them walked the only living thing that shared their pilgrimage, the dog. And by degrees, they reached the briny sea. Then, with souls well disciplined, they reached the northern region and beheld, with heaven aspiring hearts, the mighty mountain Himavat, whereupon the lake was lapping. The lilacs were blowing, the chinars were budding, the mountains were glistening, the waterfalls were playing, the spring was green, the snow was white, the sky was blue, the fruit blossoms were clouds, and he was still thirsty. Then the snow was not glistening, the fruit blossoms were not clouds, they were mosquitoes. The Himalayas were hidden by dust, and he was thirstier than ever. Then the lake was blowing, the snow was blowing, the waterfalls were blowing, the fruit blossoms were blowing, the seasons were blowing away. He was blowing away himself, whirled by a storm of blossoms into the mountains, where now the rain was falling. But this rain that fell only on the mountains did not assuage his thirst, nor was he, after all, in the mountains. He was standing among cattle in a stream. He was resting with some ponies knee-deep beside him in the cool marshes. He was lying face downward, drinking from a lake that reflected the white-capped ranges, the clouds piled 5 miles high behind the mountain Himavat, the purple chinars and the village nestling among the mulberries. Yet his thirst still remained unquenched, perhaps because he was drinking not water, but lightness and promise of lightness. How could he be drinking promise of lightness? Perhaps because he was drinking not water, but certainty of brightness. How could he be drinking certainty of brightness? Certainty of brightness, promise of lightness, of light, 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 and again of light. Light, 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 light. The console, an inconceivable anguish of horripilating hangover, thunderclapping about his skull, and accompanied by a protective screen of demons nattering in his ears. Became aware that in the horrid event of his being observed by his neighbors, it could hardly be supposed he was just sauntering down his garden with some innocent horticulture object in view, nor even that he was sauntering. The consul, who had waked a moment or two ago on the porch and remembered everything immediately, was almost running. He was also lurching. In vain, he tried to check himself, plunging his hands with an extraordinary attempt at nonchalance, in which he hoped might appear 241 by 692 more than a hint of consular majesty, deeper into the sweat-soaked pockets of his dress trousers. And now, rheumatisms discarded, he really was running. Might he not, then, be reasonably suspected of more dramatic purpose, of having assumed, for instance, the impatient busket of a William Blackstone, leaving the Puritans to dwell among the Indians, or the desperate mien of his friend Wilson, when he so magnificently abandoned the university expedition to disappear, likewise in a pair of dress trousers, into the jungles of darkest Oceania, never to return? Not very reasonably. For one thing, if he continued much further in his present direction toward the bottom of his garden, any such visioned escape into the unknown must shortly be arrested by what was, for him, an unscalable wire fence. Do not be so foolish as to imagine you have no object, however. We warned you, we told you so, but now that in spite of all our pleas, you have got yourself into this deplorable He recognized the tone of one of his familiars, faint among the other voices, as he crashed on through the metamorphosis of dying and reborn hallucinations, like a man who does not know he has been shot from behind. Condition, the voice went on severely. You have to do something about it. Therefore, we are leading you toward the accomplishment of this something. I'm not going to drink, the consul said, haltingly, suddenly. Or am I? Not mezcal, anyway. Of course not. The bottle's just there, behind that bush. Pick it up. I can't, he objected. That's right. Just take one drink, just the necessary, the therapeutic drink, perhaps 2 drinks. God, the consul said. Good God, Christ. Then you could say it doesn't count. It doesn't. It isn't mezcal. Of course not. It's tequila. You might have another. Thanks, I will. The consul paisleyed readjusted the bottle to his lips. Bliss, Jesus, sanctuary, horror, he added. Stop. Put the bottle down. Geoffrey Thurman, what are you doing to yourself? Another voice said in his ear so loudly he turned around. On the path before him, a little snake he had thought a twig was rustling off into the bushes, and he watched it a moment through his dark glasses, fascinated. It was a real snake, all right. Not that he was much bothered by anything so simple as snakes, he reflected with a degree of pride, gazing straight into the eyes of a dog. It was a pariah dog, disturbingly familiar. Peril? He repeated. As it stood still there, but had not this incident occurred, was it not now, as it were, occurring an hour or 2 ago? He thought in a flash, strange. He dropped the bottle, which was of white corrugated glass. Tequila Ano de Jalisco, it said on the label. Out of sight into the undergrowth, looking about him, all seemed normal again. Anyway, both snake and dog had gone, and the voices had ceased. Consul now felt himself in a position to entertain, for a minute, the illusion that all reality was normal. Yvonne would probably be asleep, no point in disturbing her yet. And it was fortunate he'd remembered about the most full tequila bottle. Now he had a chance to straighten up a little, which he never could have done on the porch before greeting her again. There was altogether too much difficulty involved under the circumstances in drinking on the porch. It was a good thing a man knew where to have a quiet drink when he wanted it without being disturbed, etc., etc. And all these thoughts were passing through his mind, which, so to say, nodded gravely, accepted them with the most complete seriousness. While he gazed back up his garden, oddly enough, it did not strike him as being nearly so ruined as it had earlier appeared. Such chaos might exist, even lent an added charm. He liked the exuberance of the unclipped growth at hand, whereas further away, the superb plantains flowered so finely and obscenely, the splendid trumpet vines, brave and stubborn pear trees, the papaya planted around the swimming pool and beyond. The low white bungalow itself covered by bougainvillea, its long porch like the bridge of a ship, positively made a little vision of order, a vision, however, which inadvertently blended at this moment as he turned by accident into a strangely subaqueous view of the plains and the volcanoes, with a huge indigo sun multitudinously blazing southeast. Or was it northwest? He noted it all without sorrow, even with a certain ecstasy, lighting a cigarette. And alas, though he repeated the word alas aloud mechanically, then the alcohol sweat pouring off his brow like water, he began to walk down the path toward the fence, separating his garden from the little new public one beyond that truncated his property. In his garden, which he hadn't looked at since the day he arrived, when he'd hidden the bottle, and which seemed carefully and lovingly kept, there existed at the moment certain evidence of work left uncompleted. Tools, unusual tools, a murderous machete, an oddly shaped fork, somehow nakedly impaling the mind with its twisted tines glittering in the sunlight. We're leaning against the fence, and also was something else, a sign uprooted or new, whose oblong pallid face stared through the wire at him. Le gusta este jardin? It asked. Le gusta este jardin, que asil, evite que sus hijos lo destroyan. And my Spanish is horrible, folks. I'm sorry. That's the best I'm ever gonna do. Well, that was a wonderful, rambling, meandering passage, delicious, with voice and poetry, and a veritable simulation of intoxicated thought, as does Stream of Consciousness provide. It reminds me of many yesterdays, also in my youth, not unlike sketching in museums. I had many a strange bottle in those days. But that was really cool. Never read this guy before, Malcolm Lowry. He comes heavily recommended from our resident poet, David. And now I can see why. David, how did you like to read? And I know how you feel about the passage, but let the audience know, please.
The read was excellent. And don't worry about the Spanish. It's not a matter of importance. What's important is the observation of the words on the page, and you did that very well. And yes, it was very difficult for me because there's another passage in the book that I wanted to feature, but because of the length of it and because I'm so busy reading and writing work, and I'm so incredibly busy that I couldn't locate the passage in the chapter that I wanted, where there's a hallucination of a mural in a cantina that's quite startling. But this also works very well for the purposes of surrealism. And it's just, the imagery is extremely arresting and beautiful. And as to the content itself, the descriptions of the perception of the world around him, of an alcoholic's perception of the world, I would say that the only way to write that is to actually be an alcoholic. And that was the case with Mr. Lowry. He was an alcoholic most of his life, and he was never cured. And it's a very tragic story, but we have this masterpiece. So we have to be grateful for what we have.
Yes, I'd say. And I second the motion about, because it's both of these cases is there's a experiential quality to what's going on, and the voice is influenced by that experience. And it is exactly as you say. The reason that he writes such wonderful, or I should say such accurate drunken voice, is because he had that experience, those moments of clarity among time slips and hunting for bottles and complaining about phantom things that are no longer happening or will happen, and disjointed in folly, standing around somewhere not knowing what's going on. All of that was very, very faithful to the intoxicated concept, a virtual simulator, for such things. Wonderful. I know you have quite a lot you could say about this and about the author. So by all means, don't feel
certainly
fettered. Yeah.
Yes. I can recommend a film by John Ford. There was a adaptation of this. It's called Under the Volcano. And there's a documentary that can be found on YouTube about Malcolm Lowry, and that I highly recommend. That talks about his life and his marriage, his slow descent into disintegration of his personality, of his sanity. And what I think the takeaway from all of this is that one could address this as an issue of, and I brought this up with you personally, I think in the past, Ricky, that does one need to burn brightly and shortly, or does one burn slowly and dimly? Which choice does the writer or the artist have? Those are the two choices. So do you want to burn like a comet, but go out quickly, or as in Mr. Lowry's case, or do you want to take a different, slower path? And perhaps you won't burn as much fuel. You won't burn your candle as quickly, but you won't burn as brightly. So that's the question I would bring up to you. That's the philosophical question, or the problem for the artist. And so what do you say about that?
It's a loaded question and a fated question, because inevitably, whenever you disclose your position on this matter, you pick a side, and a lot of people will then say, "Oh, well, it's mere self-destruction," or "He's just a basket case," or they'll say a lot of insensitive things without taking to account the artist has a unique perception. And that unique perception manifests itself creatively. And there's a lot of burden and a lot of weight. A lot of people will say, "Oh, that's just what you say because you're entertaining self-destruction, or you're trying to make excuses." There's so many kind words people have to say. Artists are filled with desires and with dreams. And our bodies, I mean, not all of us, but I think the ones that you're speaking of, the ones that burn brightly, so to say, they view their bodies as prisons. And the only true freedom that they get are the wings that come from words and the expressions of a poetic heart. And when they can't rage and ache and explode with those feelings and with those portents, when they can't express themselves in that way because of some such obstacle, we won't say what that is, because it'll be whatever it is, it'll be a laundry list of bummers. They feel trapped, and who knows what other problems they have. Humans are filled with problems. So I don't judge the ones that burn brightly or that escape suddenly. It's sad what happens, but that's how it is here in this universe.
I would argue that perhaps the problem comes in the romanticizing of the process, because what happened to Mr. Lowry was that he died in his 50s early on, and he died in a miserable way. He downed an entire bottle of gin, ate half of a sandwich, and then swallowed nearly a full bottle of barbiturates, and choked on his vomit. And that's how he passed. That's hardly. I mean, if you talk in terms of the cost of what it means to burn so brightly, I think it's reasonable to bring up these less than pleasant facts about many. You can take many splendid examples in rock music today, if you prefer, or any of the other arts. Our gods, our creative gods, were mortals. They weren't gods; they were mortals, and they had to burn through their flesh to reach that state of deity. So there's a lesson here. If you want to reach for the sun, you will end up burning yourself. So that's how I would look at it. You can take it if you want to die young and leave a beautiful corpse, as they say, go for it. I'm not going to place any judgment on anyone who does that, who's self-destructive. But there's a high price. Yeah.
He left some great words behind.
Oh, yeah, it was his only great work. The rest of them were unfinished novels, and that's a tragedy, because he could have written many more books like this.
Well, that only goes to show. I mean, if the flame burns so brightly that you don't even get stuff done, then oh, poor, oh me, oh my, that's just a terrible thing. I mean, he didn't burn bright. He didn't burn bright. He exploded, and it was final. He didn't last long enough to burn brightly.
Yeah, he went supernova.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's the kind of thing that we can advocate or even excuse. I think we have to look at it for what it is. It is a sad story. It's unfortunate that he didn't live longer, but obviously the man was disturbed and had a lot of problems.
And he had a beautiful wife who cared for him and nursed him, but even she couldn't save him. So
imagine her agony when she found him.
That's why in these cases, when I hear you talk about a predestination, I'm inclined to almost believe it, because it's almost as if he were damned from the very start.
I won't argue with you. I'll only say that the concept of the ordained or the predestined, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with it, but some people write their own prophecies, and some people take their own paths and they're heedless. They will not be told a warning. And I can't even say that I'm not such a person. I don't judge too harshly. Human beings are very confused most of the time. And that's the thing. And that confusion, that lack of clarity, it destroyed him. And who knows how many others that confusion will destroy. We can only support the art and value the artist while they're alive. When they're gone, after they've destroyed themselves, it's too late. You could throw all the flowers you want on the casket. It's not going to change anything. And it's a question of mental health awareness, I think, which is something that back then, I'm sure. When was this book written, David?
It was written in the 30s, and it was published in the 40s, I think, the late 40s, early 50s. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I would have to check. Yeah, I would have to check on that to be certain, but
they didn't have a very good handle on the mental health problem back then.
No, still up until I would say maybe the last half of the previous century, the people were put into asylums and they were left to die. Basically, that's how I would put it.
So I would imagine in some sort of wise corner of thought, he would have thought, well, if I don't keep myself out of that nut house, then I'll be doomed for sure. So,
yeah, I mean, he was constantly afraid of being arrested or being declared incompetent. And if it weren't for the sake of his family and his wife, he would have lived a significant number of years of his life in prison or in a hospital of some sort, in a sanatorium, perhaps.
Yeah, so that's really the deal. And I would imagine a person like him was greatly nerve-wracked, and that's probably the whole point. In order to be creative, folks, you really have to find a sense of calm. You have to de-stress yourself, center yourself, isolate yourself, and then keep the covenant between your conscious and unconscious mind that the muse has presented you with. And you have to be able to relax. It's not always so easy to relax in such a world. That's why we could be a little easy on these self-destructive firecracker soul people that we're going over here, the exploding soul, as it were. It's not so easy to relax. It's not so easy to take calm in such a place when there are such a myriad of worries and concerns.
The only thing that I could come up with to explain this phenomenon, this Roman candle phenomenon of creativity, is that you have a creative person of such a high sensitivity and awareness, much higher than a person like myself. Like, they just know and see everything. and it slowly, it's too much for the psyche of the individual to cope with. It's being let into that behind the veil, or what is transcendent, the light from God, if you prefer, is just too bright and too alarming for the psychology of a human. So maybe that's why he had just an awareness that, and a sense of the cost of things. I highly recommend everyone read this novel. It's one of the most important novels of the last century. It should be on everyone's reading list. And
under the volcano, folks.
Yes.
Malcolm Lowry. You heard it here first from David Anderson, the poet. And he knows his prose too. Don't kid yourself. So, reaching into the transcendent, which is the transcendent. What's the transcendent? Well, there's all these other stereo instructions and ingredients lists and shopping lists and all these other things. And then there's a bolt of genius, a passage you read that you'll never forget. Consciousness altering books. That's what the transcendent is. The transcendent is the thing that many authorities tell you that you cannot have, that you will not achieve. They minimize and reduce you, and they keep you small. But the transcendent is possible. Malcolm Lowry found it here. The muse gave it to him, and he was able to scrawl it down before doom claimed him. And that's the whole point. The transcendent comes, it visits, and it bites, and then it leaves. And if you're not there to take it, if you're not there to put it down, if you can't get out of your own way, set your ego aside and embrace the transcendent, then you won't be able to achieve these things. You won't show up on shows where people read your work and go, oh, ooh, ah, and they're amazed the way we are this evening. Both of these works were fantastic. And they teach you something about a mode of voice, about the concept of writing a voice that matches consciousness, whether it be a dream state or some mode of drunkenness or other intoxication. In the case of some other creatives I know, when they're sick and they have a delirium comes over them, a fever sickness, and they have muses and dreams and inspirations of the oddest sort. And sometimes in that state, it influences their creativity for years to follow. It's the nature of consciousness and how mysterious it is and how little we know about it. It's a lot to take with you on the creative journey. People think this stuff is simple, but when you're a creative obsessor, you look into all these mysteries very closely and you seek to find out the truth behind them. And some people say that it's impossible to find the truth, the absolute truth, but just another transcendent quality. Write, folks. Read obsessively. Write obsessively. Keep reaching for that transcendent moment. And you never know. Before the end, it may find you. You may find you're an exceptional writer, an exceptional creative. Don't give up. Don't give up. We won't. No matter how bright the flame burns, you have to embrace, like they did, the experiential quality of life and add it to your voice. So do that, folks. Write something of your experience. Write something, some mode of consciousness that you understand very well, so that it can help you learn that transcendent truth that can be found in writing. It's been a fantastic show. It blinks by. I have a ball doing it every week. It blinks by. I don't even mind it. So now it's plug time. Now that we've unpacked this great wisdom, poetic surrealism, certainly, but experiential voice, something to remember, the intimacy of it. This has been Joe's Writers Club, JWC Livestream, Sublimated Posey with Ricky and David. Thank you for joining us again for another exciting episode where we learn about all this cool creative stuff. I can't get enough of it. Go over to joeswritersclub.com. Head over to joeswriters.club. Check out JWC's social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And please do head over to our YouTube channel, Joe's Writers Club, JWC, and like and subscribe. We need more subscribers so that we can bring more to you and help you more. We have a wonderful writers community at Joe's Writers Club. For years and years, we've been at it, helping people and learning. And there's just nothing but goodness, unraveling the mysteries of creativity, nothing but benefit. And we thank you very much for listening, folks. Tune in next week, same time, same channel, and we'll see you then, hopefully. I want to thank David Anderson for being here today and co-hosting, making another marvelous episode with me. And David, thanks a lot. And we wish you all farewell, folks. See you soon.